Listen, just for a moment, not with your ears, but with that quiet place in your mind that only wakes up when everything else goes still. Forget the noise in the room, the hum of machines, the distant sounds of your world. Listen instead to the pressure behind the silence, to that faint, almost imaginary weight that presses on your awareness when you picture the dark between stars. If you let your thoughts soften, if you let your breathing slow, you might feel it. Not as a sound, not as a vision, but as a presence. A sense that something out there is moving, not randomly, not aimlessly, but with a calm, patient purpose that has nothing to do with us, and yet seems to be moving with us. Not toward us, not away from us, just there, just alongside. That feeling has a name now, a convenient label we can write in papers and plot on charts. Comet 3I/Atlas. But the deeper truth, the one that sinks into you like cold water, is this. Atlas may never have been traveling alone. When it first appeared in our instruments, Atlas was supposed to be a simple story. A pale shard of ancient ice drifting on an elegant, cold arc through the outskirts of our solar system. Another interstellar visitor, like Oumuamua before it. A traveler passing through, a guest, not a resident. Observatories across the planet received coordinates, turned their mirrors and dishes toward a faint blur on the edge of night. On screens, it appeared as a glowing head smudged with cyan light, trailing a soft, misty tail that faded into blackness. It looked exactly like what we tell ourselves comets are: distant, harmless, predictable. Numbers were logged, trajectories computed, press releases drafted. For a little while, everyone was content with that version of the universe. It felt safe. It felt complete. But the universe does not confess its secrets in headlines. It hides them in decimals, in residuals, in the parts of graphs that don't quite line up. And in those forgotten corners of the data, Atlas began to breathe in a different way. At first, no one saw it. The strange behavior lived inside raw logs, long columns of numbers that most eyes skim past. A slightly off speed here, a tiny shift in direction there, a timestamp that didn't match the model by a fraction of a second. One analyst blamed a software artifact, the ghost of an old calibration routine bleeding into new code. Another suggested the atmosphere had distorted just the right photons at just the wrong time. A third shrugged and flagged it as noise. This is how science works at a distance. You expect uncertainty. Light that has crossed billions of kilometers has to survive dust, plasma, and the trembling air above our own planet. Nothing arrives perfect. But imperfection does not repeat itself in the same direction over and over. With each fresh observation, the same quiet disobedience appeared. Atlas was refusing to behave like a solitary comet under the clean pull of the sun and the well-understood gravity of the planets. Something else was tugging on it, gently, persistently, like a hand on the edge of a coat. Not enough to fling it off course, just enough to redraw the outline of its path. When scientists stripped away Jupiter's pull, removed Neptune's influence, accounted for the thermal push of sunlight and the jets of vapor spraying from the ice, there was still a residue left over. Something was still there in the equations, even after everything visible had been subtracted. It looked like gravity. It felt like gravity. But there was nothing in the sky to justify it. So they did what scientists always do when reality refuses to agree. They tried to break their own work. They adjusted input parameters. They replaced algorithms. They widened error margins until the uncertainty was wide enough to drive a star through. Then they narrowed them again. The anomaly did not vanish. It did not soften into randomness. It stood there, small but stubborn, like a fingerprint on glass that refuses to wipe away. At some point, quietly, reluctantly, a sentence began to form in the minds of the people watching the numbers. Comet Atlas is not moving alone. Something is traveling with it, invisible, massive, patient. Most cosmic mysteries announce themselves like fireworks, sudden bursts of radiation, blinding flares, violent eruptions that demand attention. This one chose the opposite. It made its presence known not by appearing, but by slightly changing how something else moved. It wrapped itself in stillness and spoke through small deviations. The way Atlas began to tilt a fraction of a degree sooner than the model said it should. The way its tail bent into a soft spiral that didn't quite line up with the push of the solar wind. The way jets of gas from its nucleus seemed to obey an order that no one had programmed into the universe. When astronomers filtered out every known influence, when they asked the data to show them only what didn't fit, what remained felt almost intimate. A tiny oscillation in position, a subtle sway in speed, a repeating pattern, fragile but real, like the faint, steady beat of a heart hidden behind the glow of the comet. Not random, not noise, rhythm. Something was pacing Atlas, not chasing it, not colliding with it, simply walking with it, old, slow, impossibly calm. Telescopes did what telescopes do when confronted with a new question. They tried to see more. Apertures opened wider. Integration times grew longer. Instruments tuned themselves to frequencies where forgotten worlds and cooling stars can still be found. The search was simple in principle. If something has mass, it should reflect light. If it has warmth, it should glow in infrared. If it blocks light, it should cast a tiny, passing shadow on background stars. They searched for light. They found none. Even the most sensitive detectors, capable of noticing the faint heat of a planet orbiting another sun, reported emptiness. No extra point of brightness near Atlas. No dim signature drifting in step with it. No tight, transient eclipse as something opaque crossed in front of distant starlight. Whatever traveled with Atlas refused to leave a single photon behind as evidence. It moved like absence, and yet the universe still bent around it as if something heavy were there. The equations made a space for it, the images did not. Ideas began to gather, cautiously at first. Perhaps there was nothing exotic at all, just a large, dark rock, coated in materials that reflect almost no light. Perhaps a small frozen world, so cold that its warmth sat below the detection threshold of our current instruments. These are comfortable ideas. They sit close to what we already know. But fragments tumble and spin, and their tumbling leaves chaotic fingerprints in their motion. Rogue planets, even the cold ones, bleed a whisper of heat into space. If you stare at them long enough in infrared, they answer. The thing with Atlas did not answer. It behaved too smoothly for rubble, too controlled for a broken shard. It was as if something had been designed, or had evolved, not to shine, not to glow, not to be seen at all, but only to exist as a pattern in the bending of space. A traveler that speaks only through curves. When the present begins to fail, science turns backward. Using accumulated measurements of Atlas's motion, researchers wound its orbit back through time, simulating where it would have been years, decades, centuries ago. If the strange behavior was new, it would appear only in recent loops. If it was old, it would echo through the past like a repeating whisper. The past whispered. Atlas had never truly followed the quiet, simple arc they once drew on planetarium domes. Its path contained scars, subtle deviations that appeared at regular intervals, like ripples frozen in a pond long after the stone that created them sank out of sight. These deviations did not match the gravitational influence of any known planet. They did not line up with the flybys of passing stars. They were not consistent with random collisions or close encounters. They lined up with nothing we know, except themselves. This was not a new visitor suddenly joining Atlas on one particular orbit. This was an old presence, rediscovered, like finding a series of footprints fossilized in different layers of stone and realizing that whatever walked there came this way again and again, long before anyone was here to see it. Whatever traveled with Atlas had been part of the story far longer than we have been able to read it. Then came the acceleration. Comets are notorious for misbehaving. They hiss and boil as sunlight wakes their buried ice. They fire jets in random directions, skewing their motion like poorly balanced thrusters. But we know this. We can predict the general shape of their chaos. We know when their approach to the sun will warm them enough to shove them sideways a little. Atlas refused to follow even those rules. It sped up at the wrong times. Not when its surface was bright and active, spraying gas into space, but when it was darker and closer to dormancy. Not when its jets were at their strongest, but when they had faded. It was as if a gentle push were being applied from outside, from behind, unrelated to how much ice was turning into vapor. A steady hand, guiding, correcting, persuading. When they plotted the acceleration vector, the story simplified in a disturbing way. The source of the extra push was not in the direction of the outgassing jets. It was not aligned with the sun. It was not random. It lay almost directly along the path of an invisible point that seemed to move in perfect step with Atlas, like a partner slightly behind it on the same orbit. The unthinkable thought surfaced. The thing we could see, the comet, might not be leading the dance at all. It might be following. To test this, scientists stopped looking for an object and started looking for the shape of space-time itself. They took deep field images along Atlas's route, stretching the resolution as far as it would go. In some regions, background stars appeared minutely out of place when compared to older plates taken before Atlas had arrived in that patch of sky. Not by much, just enough to be wrong. As if the grid lines of reality had been gently nudged where the comet and its unseen companion passed. This was not a shadow. This was not a glow. This was geometry. What left these marks was not a body blotting out starlight, but something tugging at the path of the light itself. A gravitational fingerprint pressed into the fabric of the universe. When they tried to match the distortion to a mass, they arrived at something too heavy to ignore and too small to classify easily. Less than a planet, more than a rock, entirely indifferent to our categories. Slowly, reluctantly, the mind drifted toward the darkest archetype we have. An object that refuses light but shapes space is what we once created the term black hole for. Not necessarily the titanic monsters that sit at the centers of galaxies, shredding stars and bending time into knots, but small, dense remnants of collapsed matter, remains of things that burned and died long before our sun was born. Too tiny to see, too heavy to be harmless. Imagine a seed from the early universe, compressed into something no larger than a mountain, maybe smaller, drifting for billions of years through the galaxy, until it drifted close enough to our system to be caught. Not with a shout, not with a blast of energy, but with a silent, unbreakable agreement written in orbit and inertia. A primordial black remnant bound to a comet of ice. Two dancers, one visible, one invisible, tied together by nothing but gravity and time. No one wanted to say the words black hole in public. Small black holes, in theory, should be loud in their own way. They should leave more aggressive scars. But the thing with Atlas moved with an eerie gentleness. Its influence was unmistakable, but not destructive. It did not tear, it guided. It did not roar, it rearranged. If it was a black hole, it was a strange one. If it wasn't a black hole, it was stranger still. A compromise idea began to surface. Perhaps this was not a bare singularity, but something wrapped, cloaked, not in cloth, but in dark matter. Dark matter does not reflect light. It does not glow. It passes through ordinary matter like a thought that never turns into words. And yet, somehow, it shapes everything. Galaxies spin as they do because dark matter holds them together. Clusters form where its invisible weight piles up. We know it is there only because light misbehaves around it. If a dense core, a compact remnant, a frozen object, something heavy, were wrapped in a halo of dark matter, it would be almost perfectly unseen. Gravity without image, presence without face. Such a thing could drift through the solar system and never appear in a telescope, unless, perhaps, it carried something bright with it, like a torch in its wake. If that were true, then Atlas was not the mystery. It was the highlight, the pointer, the stray fleck of glitter that finally made us notice the invisible hand wearing it. As more data came in, the pattern of motion between Atlas and its companion began to take on a rhythm. The comet sped up and slowed down in cycles, exchanging energy with an unseen partner the way binary stars sometimes do, swinging around each other in an endless gravitational waltz. The two could no longer be modeled realistically as comet plus anomaly. They needed to be modeled as a pair. Two travelers sharing a path through the dark. One made of ice and dust, glowing faintly. One made of something else entirely, leaving no light at all. Atlas's tail, that soft stream of dust and gas trailing behind it, became a kind of message board. Normally, a comet tail simply stretches away from the sun, pushed by light and wind in a clear, predictable direction. But in processed imagery, Atlas's tail carried a twist. A slow, repeating spiral pattern, as if the material were being stirred by a spoon that no one could see. Simulations showed that a secondary gravitational source, close but invisible, could imprint such a corkscrew in the spreading dust. Without meaning to, without ever knowing, the comet was writing the presence of its companion across the sky. At some point, the loudest, simplest assumption flipped. What if Atlas was never the main character? What if what we have been calling a comet with an anomaly is actually an anomaly that happens to have a comet? The invisible mass may be the real traveler. Atlas may be little more than a tethered light, orbiting a companion that has passed through many such systems before ours. A lantern in the hand of something that casts no shadow. Under that perspective, the story shifts. We are not watching a comet being occasionally nudged by something odd. We are watching something odd pass through our neighborhood with a small piece of glowing debris tied to it. The universe once again reminds us of a rule we never fully learn. The brightest thing in a story is not always its center. Other possibilities tried to pull the narrative back toward comfort. A rogue world, ejected from another system, wandering alone through interstellar darkness until our sun's gravity gently bent its path. A failed planet, or a dense, airless body without a star to call home. These exist. We know they do. They drift between suns like forgotten experiments. But rogue worlds, for all their loneliness, still obey certain rules of brightness and heat. They still answer faintly when light touches them, or when their own warmth leaks into space. The thing traveling with Atlas answered no such call. Then there was the poetic theory that Atlas and its partner had been born together in some forgotten corner of the early solar system. Two clumps of material condensing from the same collapsing cloud, pulled apart by early chaos, and then over unimaginable stretches of time, drawn together again. Ancient companions, lost and reunited. Binary stars, binary asteroids, binary black holes? Why not binary comets and their invisible twins? If that were the case, their reunion was not a glitch. It was inevitability arriving right on schedule. As the analysis deepened, one more layer of strangeness appeared. When Atlas's brightness was measured with extreme sensitivity, a faint rhythm emerged in the timing of its flickers. Not the fast beat of a rotating body, not the irregular sputter of outgassing, but a subtle, longer periodicity that did not match any known cycle. Almost like a quiet vibration running through the comet, as though something external were flexing and relaxing its grip in slow, steady intervals. Was it a gravitational resonance? A tidal effect from the companion gently kneading the comet's interior? A kind of invisible tide rising and falling through its frozen core? The data wasn't clear enough to name it, But the existence of a pattern where randomness was expected added another thread of unease. Patterns feel like intention, even when they are born from physics alone. As Atlas slipped closer toward the inner solar system, giving us better views and richer data, the expectation, the hope, was that the anomaly would resolve. Many mysteries soften under scrutiny. The closer we get, the simpler they become. But around Atlas and its unseen partner, the opposite sensation grew. The closer we looked, the more space around them seemed disturbed. Not shattered, not ripped, just wrong. Microscopic lenses of distortion appeared in the dust fields they passed through. Tiny, repeated shifts in the tracks of background stars hinted at an ongoing flex in the fabric of space. It felt less like a single thing moving through a neutral environment and more like an entire patch of reality traveling with them, slightly out of tune with the rest. In a small, tired conference room, in the glow of too many screens and the smell of too much coffee, someone finally spoke the possibility that had been waiting patiently at the edge of everyone's mind. They said, "Not a body, not a compact remnant, not a rogue world, but a distortion itself, a knot of space-time that had become detached from the event that created it, like a ripple that never faded. A traveling wound, a localized bending of reality with no remaining source except the bend itself." In that scenario, Atlas was not being escorted by a hidden traveler. It was passing through a region of warped geometry, like a boat moving across a current of invisible depth. The companion was not beside it. The companion was the invisible medium. If that is true, then there is nothing, anywhere, for us to photograph. No sphere, no halo, no surface. Only an area where the rules shift slightly, moving through the solar system as quietly as a thought. Our equations can handle such abstractions. Our instincts cannot. Human bodies evolved in forests and plains, where danger had eyes and teeth and sound. The idea of a predator with no body, no intention, no awareness, only effect, is something our nervous system does not know how to file away. Scientists involved with the Atlas anomaly later admitted, in off-record conversations, that something about the situation bothered them more deeply than similar puzzles in the past. Not because it threatened Earth, there was no collision course, no apocalyptic trajectory, but because it felt like being in a room with someone you can't see. A presence that doesn't speak, doesn't move against you, yet constantly reminds you that you are not alone. A black hole has no eyes. A rogue massive object has no face. A curved piece of space-time has no mind. And yet we feel watched by the consequences of their existence. Models continued to churn. Supercomputers ran scenario after scenario, adjusting mass, distance, velocity, composition. Each configuration fit one piece of the puzzle, none fit all. Dark matter halos explained the gravity, but not the strange steadiness. Naked black remnants explained the mass, but not the muted signature. Pure geometric distortions explained the bending, but resisted long-term stability. It was as if the universe were answering every question halfway. As if it were willing to admit something is there, but unwilling to tell us exactly what. In the end, the official language stayed careful. But between the lines, the real conclusion was simpler, heavier, and harder to live with. There is something we do not understand moving with our comets. And if it moved once with Atlas, it can move again. If one comet carries a hidden partner, why not 2? Why not 10? If it took this precise alignment of technology, attention, timing, and sheer curiosity to notice this 1-second whisper beside Atlas, how many others slipped past us completely? How many subtle tugs, unexplained accelerations, faint spirals in tails were once dismissed as instruments misbehaving, when in reality they were the footsteps of something invisible walking beside our visible guests? The universe does not owe us revelations through light. Sometimes it communicates through absence. Sometimes through the unexplained bending of a trajectory. Sometimes through the way a small, icy traveler refuses to move quite the way it should. One day, Atlas will fade from our attention. Its orbit will carry it away. Its ice will slowly sublimate over countless journeys. Its tail will thin and vanish. Its name will drift to the quieter pages of archived research. But whatever moved with it, whether a cloaked remnant, a rogue world, a traveling wound in space-time, or something we do not yet have words for, that will go on. It will slip back into deeper cold, perhaps without any torch of light bound to it next time. It will move through regions of our system we have never mapped, following a path that may have begun before our star ever ignited. And somewhere, on some distant night, another telescope may catch another comet behaving in a way that is just a little too graceful, a little too obedient to an invisible script. Another pale blur may tilt too soon, accelerate too late, write a spiral into its own tail. And once again, our instruments will whisper a phrase that our minds still struggle to accept. Something is traveling with it. Something has been traveling with us for a very long time. We are used to watching the sky as if it were a theater, with us in the front row, the actors far away and unaware. We are less used to the idea that some of those actors may be sharing our stage in a way we cannot see. That some of the quietest presences in our cosmic neighborhood may not be around us at all, but with us, woven into the very geometry of the space we live in. The comet was only the first breath. The second whisper has just begun.